hear the little note? Ah, there she is. Okay. So this is the final session in a series of five information sessions that the Housing Agency is delivering for the Citizens Information Board staff members. Today's topic is living in managed estates or apartment developments. And we are delighted to be joined by our colleague David Rouse, who is the Multi-Units Development Advisor at the Housing Agency. I will shortly pass you over to David, who will deliver the presentation, and after which we plan to take a short break, which will probably be a little after 3 p.m. We'll take about 10 minutes just for a comfort break. And then when we return after the break, we will have some time for the questions and answers session with David. So don't forget, use your Q&A function just to submit any questions that come to you today. And if we don't actually get to answer them, we can send them through at a later date for you. Okay, and we're hoping to have this whole session finished up by about 4 o'clock today. All right, so if everyone is settled, I'll hand you over now to David to start sharing his slides and to begin the session.
Thank you very much, Dimna. Good afternoon, everybody. I hope you maybe got a nice walk at lunchtime in the sunshine. Certainly, the sun is shining in Dublin, so spring has firmly sprung. Maybe you have a nice cup of tea or coffee post lunch in front of you as well to take you through the session. I'm going to share my slides on screen, and hopefully everybody can see those.
Yes.
The key topics that I've been asked to cover for you this afternoon, considering your work with our citizens in your offices around the country and the great work you do in helping them with their queries and questions. The key topics that I've been asked to cover in relation to apartments, managed estates, multi-unit developments are the basics, how MUDs and OMCs work, the rights, responsibilities, a little bit about management companies, about volunteer directors, property management agents, and AGMs. Going to talk a little bit about estate upkeep and management, then move on to the payment of annual management charges, service charges, sinking fund contributions, and thinking a little bit about the debts and arrears processes and issues involved there. I know we have colleagues from the Money and Budgeting Service from MABS maybe have joined us as well. We'll touch a little bit on noise, antisocial conduct, house rules in apartments and managed estates. I'll point you in the direction of some material on parking and clamping issues, touch on some very topical issues around construction defects, new rules around waste management regulation, touch on energy saving, insurance, and point you in the direction of lots more resources that you can access to help you in your work with our citizens living in these types of housing arrangements, which are probably relatively new to Ireland when compared with other countries around the world. But first of all, a thank you to those of you who attended our outreach events around the country in September and October last year. We were in Letterkenny, Castlebar, Waterford, Portlaoise, Killarney, and we had a couple of sessions in the Greater Dublin area as well. So lots of attendance from the public, and we would be running those again in September and October of this year. 5 or 6 of those around the country. So watch our website and our newsletter for that information. Diving in then to talk about the relationships in managed estates. Who are the owners of properties in apartments and managed estates? What's the owner's management company? How does the board of directors of the OMC work? What's the role of the property management agent? And thinking about those relationships. On the screen in front of you, you'll see a diagram which tries to capture all the different people and parties and organizations involved in a usual or a normal type of apartment block or multi-unit development. So at the center, you have in the salmon colored box, the owner's management company. So that's a company set up, incorporated with the Companies Office. It's a company limited by guarantee in most cases. It owns the freehold or the free title to the overall apartment block. It owns the exterior of the building. It owns the common areas, the lifts, stairwells, corridors, underground car parks, garden areas, all those associated parts of the property. The individual property owners own the area from, if you like, the internal skim of the paint inwards in the individual apartments. And that's the typical ownership construct in an apartment block in Ireland. The owner's management company is the freeholder. The individual property owners are leaseholders, long leaseholders from the owner's management company, but they're 999-year, 1,000-year leases. So the individual owners are effectively freeholders of the internal space in the apartment units themselves. The owners of the homes in the development are also members of the owner's management company. So they are, in legal terms, members of a company when they buy a home in a multi-unit development. So the ownership of property in a multi-unit development goes hand in hand with membership of the owner's management company. They are inextricably linked. The typical profile of owners in a multi-unit development are owner-occupiers, so people who buy their homes to live in them, and then parties who buy homes to invest or to hold for public or social housing purposes. So you'll see on the left-hand side owner-occupiers and then investor landlords. And the landlords typically are either private individuals, so people may be investing in apartments or properties for their pension funds, and then there could be institutional or commercial owners. For example, Ira's REIT, which has 3,500 apartments around Dublin, Kennedy Wilson, Patrizia, Greystar, all those commercial institutional owners on the private side. And then on the public or social side, we have AHBs, approved housing bodies, Clúid, TUA, Respond, Circle, Cooperative Housing Ireland, all those big ones. And of course, the local authorities, the city and county councils will typically own units, homes in the apartment block as well through the Part 5 acquisition process. And they, of course, then rent the homes out to tenants, to renters. So that's the typical ownership and residence side of the arrangements. From the point of view of running the building, the owners, the members of the owner's management company elect directors who are usually residents. They don't have to be, but they usually are residents in the estate. Those directors then hire a property management agent to carry out the day-to-day function in the estate. So the arrangement of the waste management, collection, gardening, repairs and maintenance, arrangements in relation to the block insurance, they're all usually undertaken by the property management agent, which acts on the instructions of the directors of the OMC. And while there is one owner's management company, usually for an apartment block, a property management agent, which is a private business, it could be Wise or Benchmark or Sherry Fitzgerald or Falcondale, any of those firms, they can act for multiple owners management companies and multiple estates. But the key point is they act on the directions of the owners management company, on the directions of the directors of the owners management company. So that's the typical scenario. The owner's management company is in many ways like a residents association because its board of directors, its committee, for want of a better term, are usually residents in the estate, but they can be landlords as well, can be directors of the OMC. It's not for profit, so it takes in the service charges and sinking fund contributions from the owners, and it pays those out for the services like the insurance, the maintenance, the repairs, building up the sinking fund, and we'll talk about those later on in detail. But it is essentially an asset manager or property management business. So it's responsible for a piece of property, an asset worth hundreds of thousands of euro, millions of euro, tens of millions of euro, maybe even hundreds of millions of euro, depending on the size of the apartment block or the estate in question. So it's a very important company. It's at the heart and the success of the estate. A report that was published by ourselves and Clúid Housing a couple of years back described the OMC as the glue binding together separate interests held by owners of property where there are shared structures, so car parks, corridors, lifts, hallways, stairs, or shared services, block insurance, waste management, gardening, repairs and maintenance, sinking fund that can't be provided individually or separated from each other. And that was the launch of the report. You can see it on our website. And Brian O'Gorman from Clúid and Michael Carey, our chairman with the glasses, and Paul Mooney, the report author. The Typical ownership of properties in multi-unit developments has got very, very complicated in recent years. And this is a little slide, which I know is a little bit blurry, but it was taken from a Department of Finance report. But it really just captured all the different types of owners of property in the country. So, as I mentioned earlier, starting on the top row on the left, you have private individuals, companies, be they Irish or foreign. You could have partnerships of of people, trusts, so different pension structures. On the next line, then, insurance or pension funds, real estate investment trusts, REITs, other investment funds, and of course, on the bottom right, the social or public ownership, the local authorities, the AHB, and now the Land Development Agency, the LDA, owns stock in multi-unit developments and other estates as well. So the reason I'm bringing this to your attention is because there are lots of different types of owners with lots of different perspectives, different agendas, different priorities, but they're all involved in the owner's management company. They're all involved in this arrangement, and everyone needs to work together to make it a success. So everyone needs to be invested literally and figuratively in the success of the owner's management company. And if that wasn't complicated enough, multi-unit developments and managed estates can take the form of more than just an apartment block. So you could have a conventional housing estate that is a multi-unit development in the sense that it has common areas like roads, footpaths, lighting. Maybe there could be a gate at the front, an electronic gate, and there could be an owner's management company in place to manage the costs associated with those common areas. And so the profile or the type of property that is a multi-unit development is not just apartment blocks, it could be conventional houses. So that's worth keeping in mind as well. The private rental sector, the institutional landlords have become much bigger in recent years and are new on the scene in Ireland, relatively new. So bear that in mind. It's more complicated. So the citizens you're dealing with may be living in an apartment block where more than half the units, more than half the homes are owned by a commercial or institutional investor. And that has implications in terms of upkeep, in terms of priorities, and so on in the running of the estate. So, as I've mentioned, there are new types of landlords. Build to rent is a type of, it's a particular construction typology, which is jargon for saying it's a different type of apartment block with bigger common areas and smaller units. Fewer and fewer of those to be seen, but it's worth bearing in mind that that could be a type of housing involved. And new to the scene as well, which has been covered in some of the other sessions, I know, is the cost rental model, where effectively owners or rather renters are in place in the are renting the properties in the estate at a subsidised rent. So therefore, the owners, be they the approved housing body or the local authority, have to think about the long-term upkeep and maintenance of the property and sinking funds and service charges, and we'll come to that as well. Just an important point to have in your mind, and that people maybe sometimes confuse or get sort of ambiguous about, is drawing the distinction between the owner's management company and the property management agent. So I've simplified the diagram a little bit to make sure that everyone understands what an OMC is and what a property management agent is, or a PMA. Like the OMC is the grey box here in the middle. The property management agent is underneath, acting on the instructions of the directors of the OMC. The property management agent is licensed. They must hold a license from the Property Services Regulatory Authority, which is the regulator of people providing property services in the country. And we'll touch on that later on. But it's very, very important to understand the distinction between the OMC and the agent. The agent is a business, a private business working for lots of different OMCs. The OMC is usually associated with one block, one estate, it's important to understand the distinction because the agent acts at the behest and on the instruction of the OMC. So often, if there's a problem in the estate, it may be a matter for the OMC rather than the property management agent. So that can be an issue, and we'll talk about dispute resolution later on. A couple of slides from the Central Statistics Office just to show you the size and the growing size of apartments and multi-unit developments in the housing stock. So over the planning permissions over the last couple of years, the gold bit at the top of the bars is the number of apartments in the planning permission pipeline. So you can see it's been very, very big over the last number of quarters, dropped off a little bit the end of last year, but still very significant. running out over nearly 20 years. The green line is the number of apartments in the planning permission stock. So you can see then that feeds through to the commencements. So the piece in the middle, the middle coloured blue bar shows you the number of apartments in the commencements. So the actual construction of units over the last 3 or 4 years, apartments are very, very high. And then whatever about permissions and commencements, completions as well, you can see the gold or yellow coloured line is apartments through the stock as well. So you can see that apartments are a much bigger and will continue to be a much larger part of our housing stock. And we know that from the last census that housing sizes are getting smaller. The number of household sizes, the number of people in a household, in a home, is dropping. The number of couples without children, the number of families without children is rising. The number of one-person households is increasing as well, and the average new dwelling size, naturally enough, if there are more apartments which are smaller in square footage, the average dwelling size in the country is falling as well. And private tenancies, it might be a surprise to you to know that nearly or over half of private tenancies are in apartments as opposed to private houses. So worth bearing that in mind that most apartments are actually rented out. About 80% apartments in the country are rented and 20% are owner occupied. And approved housing body tenancies, about half are apartments and half are houses as well. So very, very important in the public stock and in the private stock. And I mentioned Ira's REIT. They were involved in 2023. They were involved in 33 different developments where there was an owner's management company, and they paid nearly 10 million euro in fees to lots of different OMCs. So very important for them. The AHBs, these are old numbers and some extracts from their annual reports, but you can see these are the numbers of estates each of the six largest AHBs had where there was an owner's management company. So very, very important for them. And we know that apartments will form part of our housing stock into the future as well when the new housing figures are issued on the update to the draft national planning framework. So that's just to give you an idea of the context and the fact that apartments are becoming a larger part of the housing stock. They already are, and they will continue to increase as a proportion of our housing stock. A lot of you will know some of the challenges of the stock and of the sector. You'll know it from the newspapers, from the media, from different stories you read in the media. Most recently, maybe from RTE last week, there was problems around EV chargers in an apartment development out in Adamstown. So you see those coming through. I suppose, being honest, apartments have got a bad name in the country for various different reasons around challenges in how they're managed, how OMCs work, the issues around renters and parking and these types of issues, and the running of owners management companies have shone a light on challenges for the sector. And of course, the biggest challenge for the sector over the last few years has been how to resolve defects, be they fire safety defects, construction, water ingress defects, and we'll touch a little bit around that as well. So that's scene setting on the numbers and some of the challenges. What I'm going to touch on are really just highlights for you from some of the key pieces of legislation that are relevant to the running of apartment developments and managed estates. We could spend an hour on each of these. Happily, we won't, nor do we have the time to do that today, but I'll show you where you can sit back, relax, and enjoy some further webinars and information that will help you if you want to get into the detail of some of these as well. But I'll touch on highlights from the MUD Act, the Companies Act, Property Services Regulation Act, fire safety legislation, building and planning, and waste management as well. So jumping straight in around finances in managed estates. So this is probably one of the biggest concerns that citizens might be coming into you to discuss is the service charges that they are experiencing and that are being set by themselves and their owners. So the service charges in an estate are set by everyone, by the members. They have to be agreed at the annual general meeting. So everyone has the chance to input into the costs of the estate, of the budget, and the directors ultimately do the hard yards, do the work, and they present a budget to the owners for approval. But I suppose the question around whether owners and members are getting value for money must be something to bear in mind. So are the directors going out to seek a number of quotes for the services? So the waste management collector, are they shopping around for the contracts that they're issuing to the various waste management providers? Are they shopping around for the best insurance premium for the estate? What about the ESB and the electricity bill for the lighting and maybe the heating and the running of the common areas there? Are they going around seeing that they're best value for money there? And this is an extract from a budget for an owner's management company. There are 142 homes in this community, in this development. And when the budget for the scheme was been put together, the person putting together the budget said that they would charge €1,000 per unit and see how they'd get on. So the total budget is €142,000. And they've divided it out over the 142 units and levying €1,000 per unit. But within that budget, there's a premium for the insurance of the whole block of only €9,000. And, if you think what it costs to insure a car or to insure other properties, €9,000 for the insurance block of an apartment block of 142 units isn't realistic. So the question here is, are OMCs setting the right budgets? Are the members asking the right questions? And it's up to owners to get involved. If they're not happy with how the scheme is working, it is a democracy. They do have a vote attached to their property, so they can come together to improve the quality of the service charges and the budgeting. And it's important also to say that we hear people sort of saying, well, I'm not going to pay the service charge because I'm not happy with the quality of services in the estate. But that's an upside down approach to the running of the estate, because if everyone took that view, that there'd be no money to provide any services in the estate, and so everyone would suffer. So it's incumbent by law and by contract for everyone in an apartment development or in a multi-unit development to pay their service charge. It's an obligation under the head lease. It's a statutory obligation under subsection 10 of section 18 of the MUD Act. The budget was democratically decided by the membership. Everyone had a chance to vote on it, to have their say, and it does ultimately support the running of the estate in everyone's interest. So, if there was one takeaway from this slide, it is that the payment of service charges in a timely and full manner allows the success of the apartment development, because it allows the OMC to provide the services and have the money there to get on with the running of the estate. And where people are in a position to pay and can pay, the withholding of payment is not helpful in any respect. Even if there are disputes over other issues, the withholding of payment does not help anyone. Now, that said, the OMC should also, which again, the OMC is the owners in the estate. It's not some remote unknown corporate entity out there. It is just the coming together, the collection of all the owners. The OMC, the directors should think about facilitating owners to pay their service charges in as effective manner as possible. So if it's a case that people can't pay the service charges in one lump sum upfront, the OMC should negotiate with them and offer a quarterly or a monthly payment policy. So divide it up over 12 or over 4 and allow payment in that way. That's something that could be done to facilitate someone in a challenging cash flow position with their service charge. So that's the how often to pay. The how to pay should be facilitated as well by the OMC. So all the different payment methods are there. People should be permitted to pay by electronic fund transfer, debit card, post-dated checks, cash, whatever else. So give everyone the best number of options possible to pay the service charge. So these are the things that, if you're experienced citizens coming in with service charge debt built up, here are some of the options to try and help them. Seek installment payments, seek different types of payment methods as well. So that might be helpful. And if there are arrears built up, ask the OMC for the debt collection policy. So, when is the invoice issued for the service charges? When is a reminder issued? When is the second reminder issued? Is interest going to be added to the account? Is that only going to make things worse? Can you negotiate around it? So clear communication around the debt collection policy, remembering that if people don't pay, all the services will suffer and the estate will fall into a bad state of repair, and that will not help anyone. It's important to mention that the failure to pay management charges can sometimes lead to the loss of voting rights at an AGM. So people, if they want to remain in good standing with their OMC and retain their voting rights, should at least be in good standing with the payment of their service charges. And I'll touch on a little bit on that later on. So that's the day-to-day management and the payment for that. The building in which the citizens are living ultimately has a roof. Probably has a lift. It has certainly has fire safety equipment in the common areas, so smoke detectors, heat detectors, alarms, automatic opening vents, all those things to keep people safe. And we think about the sad events, obviously in Grenfell a number of years ago, most recently in North Macedonia at the weekend, and who knows what causes were and all the rest of it. But fire safety equipment and the serviceability of that and making sure it's in good repair and maintenance order and that it's up to date in terms of the equipment itself is very, very important, as is the integrity of the roof, as is the functioning of the lifts and all the rest of it. So to make sure all those things are working well, an owner's management company must set up a sinking fund. So it must accumulate money over time based on the replacement cost of all those building components divided by their expected life. So if we take an example, the Multi-Unit Developments Act, Section 19, subsection 5 says that an OMC should set aside €200 per unit per annum or such other amount as the members agree. Now, if we look at an example here of a block of 40 apartments with lots of different building components, so the roof, the windows, the fire safety equipment, the doors, the carpets, all the pumps, all the rest of it. And if we add all those components up and we take an average lifespan of say 25 years, that block of 40 apartments needs to build up nearly €600,000. Divide that over 40 apartments over 25 years. That's about €600 per unit per annum that needs to be set aside. So contrast that with what the MUD Act says. It says €200 per unit per annum or such other amount as may be agreed by the members. Now, that other amount can frequently be zero. And unfortunately, it is zero in many cases. The Society of Chartered Surveyors looked at this in 2018 and again last year and prepared a report, and it got coverage in the media. And the upshot of it all is that OMCs, apartment blocks, multi-unit developments are simply not putting enough money aside for this long-term maintenance of fire safety equipment, lifts, roofs, all the other building components that need to be replaced. So I suppose there are, and there's a little bit of reading there you can look at later on. So I suppose there are maybe inconvenient or uncomfortable truths in this presentation that everyone involved in these estates needs to think about. Are service charges adequate? In other words, will they actually meet the costs of things like insurance? Are sinking funds adequate? I think the answer to that is at the moment they're not. What about defects and the remediation and paying for those things? We'll come to that. And are there other future costs like energy increases as well that are being considered? And I suppose just to kind of take a little bit of a tangent around how these things might be improved. The Fire Safety Task Force report in 2018 highlighted and recommended that it should be easier for apartment blocks to collect service charges in a timely and efficient manner to maintain fire safety equipment. In the report I mentioned earlier, there are recommendations around regulation of this and making OMCs do more, but also empowering them to collect service charges in an easier fashion. The last programme for government had a commitment to look at the management company legislation and housing for all, which was the policy. The detailed policy came out of the programme for government, had actions to address this. So you can see item 25.10 there, to issue regulations under the MUD Act to ensure that OMCs are financially sustainable, and Action 25.11 to regulate to ensure that sinking funds are put in place. And there's a little bit on dispute resolution as well. And that was to have been done by the Department of Justice, and the Housing Commission made recommendations around this as well. And I appreciate there's a lot of detail on some of these slides. You can read them in your own time, but it's just to highlight the topic here. The current programme for government, published in January, has commitments to move responsibility for the MUD Act from the Department of Justice to the Department of Housing, and there's a commitment to establish a unit in the housing agency to regulate OMCs to ensure effective governance. So we will see where that goes, and we'll wait developments from government and from our political and housing Department of Housing colleagues to see progress on that. That's, I suppose, the picture on service charges and sinking funds, and where people can get options to pay, how they can pay, and how things might get better in the future. What about if you want to understand what's going on in an estate right now? Where do you read the story of the development? Where do you look behind the numbers? There's a special report that must be pulled together by the directors of the owner's management company in collaboration probably with the property management agent. And that report, which is not the statutory financial statements, it's a separate report under Section 17 of the MUD Act, that must be given to members at least 10 days before the AGM. And the AGM must be held every year, as its name suggests. And that special report has to contain a statement of income and expenditure, assets and liabilities. So, what are the debtors? How much has been built up in unpaid service charges by the members? Is there a sinking fund set aside? How much is in it? What's the annual contribution and how is it calculated? What's it going to be spent on? What's the budget for next year? What's the insured value of the estate? So is there a policy in place for what, for how much? That's the box in red. The fire safety equipment, which is item H there, and disclosure of contracts between the OMC and the directors. So, that's a very important report. So if you have citizens coming to you saying, I don't know what's going on in my OMC. I don't know where all this money has been spent and whether there's a sinking fund or what's going on at all and what happened last year and what happened this year. But the first question to ask that person is, well, did you get the annual report before the AGM and what did it say? And if the answer to that is, well, we didn't get it, and then why? Why didn't you get it? Contact the directors, contact the agent, ask those questions. But that is a very important document. That will tell you what's going on in the estate. Just as an aside, I mentioned insurance highlighted there in the annual report. We have published the very first ever dedicated guide to insurance in multi-unit developments. It's available on our website, and I've included the contents page there. It covers, common area insurance, block insurance, employer's liability, public liability, information on defects, and there's a glossary in it to deal with lots of commonly used terms as well. So that's a quick touch on some of the main points of the MUD Act. Just a quick aside on the role of solicitors and of property management agents. So we mentioned how important the role of the agent is earlier. We should also really emphasize the role of solicitors and law agents in the buying and selling of properties. And an important document here is what's called the requisitions on title, which is a jargonistic term, a fancy term for a questionnaire. The requisition questionnaire is issued by the purchaser's solicitor to the seller of the property or to his solicitor. And in the context of an apartment development, the owner's management company should be answering questions in relation to the property. And I've highlighted some of the more important ones there. So you should seek a copy of that Section 17 annual report. You should seek a copy. So I say someone buying a home in a multi-unit development should seek the accounts of the last number of years of the OMC. Ask hard questions. Are there any claims against the OMC? Is there a big insurance claim pending that could cost the scheme money either in damages or in an increased premium for next year? Are there repairs or defects in the issue? Is there any court cases against the OMC? So the point here is that solicitors and law agents have a very important role for our citizens in the buying and selling of property, because it is they that will ask the hard questions and will have the opportunity to have the questions asked, so that when people are going in to buy an apartment or a home in a managed estate, that they understand there is that extra layer of the OMC, but there is the opportunity to ask those questions. And if you're not getting the answers to the questions, that might be an indicator or a challenge in and of itself. That might be a reason to ask even harder questions. So that's the role of solicitors and law agents. The property management agent must have a license They are, as I mentioned, regulated by the Property Services Regulatory Authority. So the agent must have a license from the PSRA. So that's the agent there again, circled for you in the red at the bottom. This is who we're talking about here. The PSRA regulates the agents. PSRA doesn't regulate OMCs. It doesn't regulate landlords, and that's clear on their complaints page, which I've included for you there. They regulate the agents. They ensure that agents are meeting the minimum standards. They're meeting the code of practice, and I've included a link there to the minimum standards for you. So these are the things that the agents must adhere to in their dealings with their clients in relation to professional behaviour, in relation to tenancies, letters of engagement, and so on. And the letter of engagement is a very important piece of documentation. So this is a fancy term for a contract, and it is the contract that is in place between the OMC, so the entity owning and in charge of the apartment development, and the property management agent itself. And so all the services provided by the agent to the OMC and to the estate should be set out in that document. I've included a link to the most recent version of it, and the Property Services Regulator last year highlighted the importance of this document. So this will set out, for example, how many times the agent might attend directors' meetings, how many times the agent has to come on site and have a look around, the costs involved in that, and all the other costs involved in providing services to the estate. And a little bit of a plug. We have a webinar with the Property Services Regulatory Authority taking place at lunchtime on the 20th of May. So keep an eye on our website and on the PSRA's website. And that is going to talk about the letter of engagement. And we'll have Maeve Hogan, the Chief Executive of the PSRA, going into detail on that. So we'll look forward to that. And some of you might join us on that. In the meantime, the housing agency published the first ever guide for owners, management company directors to how to go about hiring a property management agent. So there is lots of information in that has relevance to tendering for other services as well. So that might be helpful to some of you who come across some of this. And I've included a little article that was in the Institute of Professional Auctioneers and Valuers recent magazine about how property management agents work. So that's, as promised, the Multi-Unit Developments Act highlights, the Property Services Regulation Act, some highlights. What about company law? Owners management companies are companies with directors, as we've been saying so many times. Directors are officers of the company. They have legal, statutory, fiduciary, or faith duties. They're stewards of the company. They have to act in the best interests of everyone in the company. They have to act honestly and responsibly. They have to act in compliance with the law and the company's governing documents. They have to avoid conflicts of interest. So I've included, those things on screen there. And I'm just going to stop sharing and just sort of talk very quickly to say that, the directors of an OMC have very responsible roles, but they're supported by a property management agent. They're supported by independent legal advice, which they should be taking. They should have directors and officers insurance in place, and that's covered in our insurance guide. And they do work together as a team, as a board, collectively. So anyone joining the board of an OMC should be aware of that framework of support and decision making, and also the resources that are available from ourselves in the housing agency and indeed others. But they are directors ultimately, and they do have that executive responsibility. We've summarised all that sort of material in a guide published with Chartered Accountants Ireland, my own professional body. We called it the Concise Guide. Now it runs to about, I don't know, 25 or 30 pages. It's as concise as we could make it, but it covers directors' duties, what a good board of an OMC looks like, issues around finances, company accounts, the company secretary, all those different things. So we'd recommend that to you. I've included the link on the earlier slide there. You can see at the bottom where it is on our website. That is a very comes well recommended and has been very helpful to us. Another little quick issue in the context of company law is when COVID came in, a lot of AGMs switched online to Zoom and so on, and it wasn't within the terms of some owners management companies, and some companies rules to be able to have virtual AGMs. So a special law was brought in, was renewed over the COVID years, and now it's been brought in on a permanent basis. And from the point of view of OMCs staging virtual AGMs, the overarching or the most important point, I suppose, for members is that everyone be given, and I've underlined it in red from the law there, everyone must have a reasonable opportunity to participate in the meeting. So what that means is set out in detail in the legislation. But I suppose there are situations where people are maybe not so technologically literate, they're not as familiar with Zoom or Teams or whatever, and they need to be facilitated. They need the opportunity to make their views known in the AGM, both to other members and to the directors. They need to be able to have their vote cast, and they need to be able to participate reasonably in the AGM. So that's an important point for people to be aware of. A quick aside on, the size of and the number of OMCs in the country. We're trying to come up with a register of or a database of OMCs because of that potential regulatory function that we might have down the road. We reckon there's eight, nine, maybe 10,000 OMCs in the country, and you can look at the how we estimated that in your own time on those slides. But I'm asking for your help here. If you're involved in an OMC, you might even be a director or resident yourself, or if you know anyone who's involved in filing annual returns with the company's office or the CRO. We need OMCs to identify themselves, and there's a box to tick on the annual return, which is the Form B1, and I've shown it there from the company's office online filing system. So we need people to tick that box. There's guidance on the CRO website. So if you're involved, and there's guidance there in an article that I prepared a couple of months back. So please read that and help us identify the OMCs in the country by ticking that box and following the guidance on the CRO website. Another issue of company law is the register of members of the owner's management company. So, in some ways, an OMC can almost be seen as a kind of a layer of local government in an apartment block, in the sense that it is responsible for the upkeep of services and the upkeep of the building or the community. It levies, if you want to think about management charges and service charge and sinking fund contributions as almost a form of of taxation. But the OMC is a democracy. It is made up of an electorate, the members, the owners in the estate. And if they want to contact each other, there is a document that is a bit like the electoral register, and it's called the Register of Members. And every company has one, whether it's an OMC or any other type of company. It has a Register of Members, which is a list of everyone in the estate. So all the owners, their name, their correspondence address, and when they became a member of the company. It does not contain telephone numbers, it does not contain email addresses, but this information is available to everyone in the world. The Register of Members is a public document, so any OMC member can ask the company secretary for a copy of the Register of Members. Anyone can ask for a copy of the Register of Members for any estate, and the company secretary can charge me a nominal fee for photocopying and postage, but it is a public document. So if members and owners in an estate want to contact each other to elect new directors or to get budgets changed, they can contact each other through that information that's in the Register of Members. Again, it's names and addresses. It's not telephone numbers and email addresses. And you often hear data protection being put up as a reason not to share that Register of Members. The Corporate Enforcement Authority, in their note, which you see on screen, makes it clear that data protection is not a reason to withhold that information. And we had a session with the data protection or with the Corporate Enforcement Authority on their role in this space, and they made it clear that the Register of Members is a public document. They also have some guidance around being a director and the importance of the role and how they oversee the enforcement of company law. So I've included some links there as well. But the coming back to the data protection point, the Data Protection Commission has issued tailored guidance, which we helped them write in relation to OMCs and multi-unit developments, and they have a few case studies in there as well. And again, they say and they make it clear that data protection law is not a reason to withhold the list of the register of members. They do also have covered the issue of so-called naming and shaming of people who haven't paid their service charges. That's not permissible. There are better ways, some of which I've outlined earlier, to get people to pay than to go into that space. But you can have a look at the detail on that perhaps in your own time. So that's the MUD Act, Property Services Regulation Act, and the role of the agent and the solicitors, and then a little bit on company law. I'm going to touch a little bit on some of the key documents in a management company or in a multi-unit development. So the OMC Constitution, which is the internal rules. It used to be called the Memorandum of and Articles of Association. It's now called the OMC Constitution, and that is how to go about electing directors, when the AGM must be held, whether the company's accounts must be audited or not, and so on and so forth. So that's a document that every owner will receive when they become a member of the management company and when they buy their property. It's also available on the CRO website as well. You can download it for €2 or €3. We've dealt with the second item there, the contract with the agent or the letter of engagement. The head lease or the main lease is a very important document. So that's the contract entered into between the developer, the owner's management company, and the individual property owners. And that will set out things like who owns the balconies, who has the obligation to share, to insure the property, who will include the obligation of the, as we mentioned earlier, the obligation of the owner to pay their service charges, and so on and so forth. So that lease will be received by every owner on purchase. The house rules we mentioned earlier govern the conduct of residents, be they owner occupiers or tenants or renters or anyone else in the estate. And I'll touch on that in a little bit as well. We've mentioned earlier the debt collection policy. So that's a key document that an OMC should have and make available to its members. A risk register is probably too advanced and complicated for most OMCs, but maybe the big ones will have a register of the big threats to the development and how the directors are going about mitigating those threats. So I mentioned the OMC constitution, and I mentioned this issue before, that it's open to an OMC to withdraw the voting rights of a member who is not in good standing with their service charge. So they don't, so such a member wouldn't be entitled to vote on the budget for the year or to vote on directors and so on. And that is something that an OMC may or may not have in its constitution. And I suppose an important point in relation to all these documents is they're different in every estate. The lease is different, the OMC constitution is different, the house rules are different, all those documents are different. So it's impossible to give definitive answers to questions about any estate without seeing all those documents. So only general answers can be given. Specific answers require someone usually to get legal advice, to get a solicitor involved, to pay them to look at these documents in every estate and see what the issues involved are. So that's an important point. But that's just to draw to your attention to the OMC Constitution. This is an example of a head lease. This is what it actually looks like. Very legalistic, person of the first part, person of the second part, lots of hearings, wheretofores, moreovers, all the rest of that. But as I mentioned earlier, it will define what the common areas are. So who owns the car parks, who owns the external walls, who owns the balconies. It will define what the service charge is, what the estate service charge is. It sets out the obligations or the covenants between the parties to what to do and who has the responsibilities. I mentioned house rules governing conduct in an estate, and an important point around house rules, which are covered in Section 23 of the Mud Act, is an OMC is entitled to recover from someone who breaches the house rules the costs of remediating the breach of the house rules, if you like. So I've included there a typical house rule that says, in accordance with Section 2311 of the Mud Act, the OMC reserves the right to recover all costs incurred from the owner of a residence involved in a breach or resident breaching any house rules. So, for example, if someone's dog is fouling the carpet in a corridor, and if that someone is a tenant, the OMC is entitled to recover the costs of cleaning that fouling from the landlord. If the owner occupiers are having parties every Saturday night and the call out charge to close down that party at 2 in the morning is €100, it's open to the OMC to recover that €100 from the offending owner occupiers having the parties, so they could be added to their service charge. These are not fines, these are the recoveries of costs from people who are driving, who are causing breaches of house rules. So if someone is levying €1,000 fine arbitrarily capriciously without a basis in cost, then that's probably open to challenge in the courts. However, if it's simply the recovery of a definitive cost involved in remedying a breach of the house rules, that is recoverable from the OM from the offending owner. Other key documents that are around title or land issues could be the development agreement. So if you're looking to resolve a dispute, and this is something to bear in mind in dealing with citizens coming into you in queries, how do we go about resolving a particular dispute? The answer or the how to go about resolving dispute may be covered in the development agreement. So when the building was originally constructed, it could be in the management company agreement between the developer and the OMC. The deed of transfer of the common areas, which is basically a contract between the developer and the OMC to hand over the building so when the developer is finished building the building, he hands it over to the OMC. He hands over the common areas, the building structure, the car parks, the lifts, and all the rest of it to the OMC. So that could cover a particular dispute. Or there could be a taking in charge agreement. So it may be that a local authority, county council, is going to take over certain roads or footpaths or lighting or water services in the estate. So that'll be covered by a taking in charge agreement between the developer and the local authority. And there is a guide to that from the OPR, and it's just, I suppose it's a little bit out of date now because it was published before the Planning and Development Act, but you can look at it on their website. And I've included as well the typical taking in charge policy of a local authority. So every county council will have a different taking in charge policy, how it goes about saying, yep, these roads are up to our standards, we're happy with them, and we're going to own them now. All that is set out in the policy on their website, so you can have a look at that. I just got to quickly touch on the planning guidelines. Basically, these say that every application for an apartment planning permission must include what's called a building life cycle report. So this really deals with a lot of the issues we've been talking about before about service charges and sinking funds. And who better to cost up that from day one than the person who built the building? So the planning legislation, the planning guidelines say that every application for an apartment block must include a building life cycle report with some assessment of the long-term running and maintenance of the building. It must think about the compliance with the MUD Act, the OMC, the establishment of a sinking fund. Now, not all of these building life cycle reports are in the detail that maybe we would like to see. This what I've highlighted there is a typical sentence you see in a building life cycle report that basically says, we haven't built the building yet, so we don't know what it's going to cost to run it. My answer to that is, well, you've taken out loans, you've employed QSs, you've done detailed architectural quantity surveying and so on and so forth costings. There's a fair chance that you can make some effort to go down the road of helping the residents run the building and understand the costs of it before you hand it over to them in the form of the OMC. So maybe that'll improve into the future. So that's the MUD Act, company law, property services regulation, a little bit on planning and development, a little bit on key title documents. We talked about costs otherwise in the building. What about energy costs? And, this is a new issue over the last 3 or 4 years for us. Basically, the message here is the Sustainable Energy Authority SEAI, Sustainable Energy Authority of Ireland, are the people to go to when looking for supports for retrofitting, for improvements in apartment blocks, for maybe putting solar panels on the roof and so on. And you can access their Community Energy Grant Scheme. There's some recordings of webinars around this on our YouTube channel. There may be some credit facilities down the line. We're looking at research into this. We're looking at research into decisions of the Circuit Court of the MUD Act as well, because we don't know what's going on in court cases around the MUD Act, and we hope to find out a little bit more. So watch this space for some of that research. But just highlighting that for you, and what's coming online soon from ourselves through that research project is a suite of training videos that will help apartment developments, OMC directors, members understand sinking funds, understand the challenges, and understand in more detail how to go about the retrofitting exercise. So there'll be lots of videos there, and we'll let you know when access becomes available there. I've included 5 or 6 slides about the new regulations on waste management in multi-unit developments. You can read these in your own time. They're very detailed, and they're probably maybe nice to know rather than need to know if in this. But I suppose it is new material, so worth having a look at. The collector, waste collectors' responsibilities are all outlined, the responsibilities of householders. The message here is that waste segregation and recycling is not great in apartment developments because basically everyone takes all their rubbish and throws it into the black bin in the underground car park. And residents need to do more, but OMCs need to do more, and collection authorities need to do more, and the local authorities, the county councils, will be getting stuck into making this better through their regulation processes. And I've included the information there that people might like to read in your own time. A couple of other potted issues: parking and clamping. That will, the rights to park in different parts of the estate, when and who and how will be set out in the lease, maybe in the house rules. There will be contracts with private clamping companies in the estate. So, what's the signage in the estate around all that? Are people maybe being clamped because they haven't paid their service charges? These are all issues that come up. This is where the documents I mentioned earlier is where you can resolve these disputes. And the National Transport Authority also has a function in relation to vehicle clamping regulation. So copious material on their website if you want to go down that particular rabbit hole. A quick point on the defects remediation process. So many of you will be aware of the massive problems in terms of fire safety, construction, structural issues, water ingress. There is now a pathway to the state supporting the remediation of those defects. There is at the moment available an interim scheme for fire safety defects. So where there's an immediate life safety fire threat in an apartment block and there are works required to fix that, it's open to OMCs to apply to that scheme. In the long run, there will be primary legislation, so an act to deal with the remediation of structural water ingress, so not immediate life safety threats. That will come in due course through the legislation. There have been a number of Pathfinder projects worked through, excuse me, to see, what are the speed bumps in getting this worked through. And there was an announcement last month about a slight delay due to procurement issues in the interim remediation scheme. So watch our website for that. But in the meantime, the programme for government has committed to a building standards regulator to make sure this doesn't happen in future, and also to support the remediation of defects. The best contact is our team in the defects remediation section, and that's the email address for them. So interim.remediation@housingagency.ie, and you'll have all these slides, so don't worry about scribbling that down. In the meantime, I've put in the slides the guidance on fire safety for multi-unit developments and OMCs. So there's a full chapter in those on that, and also the rental standards as well that might be of interest. And I suppose there was some recent case law that you can read about. I've included the links in the Irish Times, where the upshot is that the OMC is responsible for the common areas, the landlord is responsible for the upkeep of the internal parts of the unit. So from the skim of paint inwards is the responsibility of the landlord, and the OMC is responsible for everything outside that. So worth a look at that if you want to look at it. What other resources are available? So the Housing Agency have been doing a lot of work around this, and I know some of you attended this session maybe 5 or 6 years ago. So lots more material available since that session. We have lots of new answers to frequently asked questions, including a sample set of house rules. So it's a Word document. People can download it and use it to adapt their house rules, which of course must be agreed in that democratic fashion through the annual general meeting. So you can look at those on our website. There are hints and tips about how people can go about appointing, recruiting new directors for their owner's management company. So I think there's about 7 or 8 or maybe 10 hints and tips around that on our website. Your own website has fantastic content, and you probably know this already, but no harm in drawing attention to it. Really fantastic detail on the Citizens Information website, looking at all these issues as well. So the defect scheme, the property services regulation, and Dara Woods and your other colleagues in Citizens Information do great work in keeping this material up to date. I've included the links to the Property Services Regulatory Authority (PSR) website, the Corporate Enforcement Authority website. So if there's a complaint about not holding AGMs, failing to file accounts, directors not undertaking their duties, the Corporate Enforcement Authority is the resource there. Society of Chartered Surveyors have lots of good guides on their website. The Apartment Owners Network have information for residents, for apartment owners, for OMC directors, so worth a look as well. On our own YouTube channel, we have hour-long sessions, and they're more than an hour, deep dives into the MUD Act, service charges and debt collection, MUD financial management, company law, the role of the management agent, sinking funds. You won't have to listen to me. You can listen to expert speakers from property management agents, solicitors, accountants, deep dives into all of that. I mean, you're done with all those, another 20 on our YouTube channel on waste management and recycling, regulation of property management agents. So we had a session last year with the PSRA. If you want more detailed reading, you can have a look at Ashton Keenan's book or Henry Murdoch's book. There's a chapter in Noel McGrath's recent book on land law. We have done writing. We have published articles in different journals, trade publications. I've included a podcast there from Australia. If you change the accent to an Irish one, you would swear he was talking about an Irish apartment block. And I did a session with the Property Pod as well. So, some of us like to read and inform ourselves. Some of us like to listen. So worth a look at those. As I mentioned, or listen indeed, as I mentioned, our outreach events in September and October will be on our website. So please do come along to those, or tell your colleagues or anyone else interested to pop along. Those are so we've had 26 of them, would you believe, over the last number of years, and those were the ones. The green ones were the ones we held last year. As I said, we're probably going to be in Galway, Cork, Limerick, Dublin, and maybe the Northwest as well. mud@housingagency.ie is the best email address for me. Delighted to hear your queries, but I think we're going to stop now for a quick break, and I think that's me more or less to time. So I'll hand back to Dimna for a suspiog and
Okay.
Major Cup on tea.
Oh my gosh, David, that was amazing. Thank you so much. So much there for everybody about MUDs and OMCs and everything. But I think if we just have a quick break and come back at 20 to 4, so that'll give everybody time just to boil the kettle quickly or go to the bathroom or whatever. We meet back here 20 to 4 and we have a few questions then for you, David. Okay?
See you then,
Thanks,
folks.
folks.
Thanks.
Hello, David. Hello, everyone. Welcome back from your break. Just a few questions for you, David. I'll start off with a nice, easy one. So, are balconies owned by the owner or common area, or does it depend on each multi-unit development?
It depends on each multi-unit development. So take out the head lease. You'll see the examples in the slides of what the covenants, or which is a fancy name, fancy word for the terms and conditions of the head lease are, and go to probably the section that's called demise, Demise, which is a kind of an archaic term for the division of the land. And that will say who owns the balconies. So it will either
Okay.
say the OMC owns XYZ, including the balconies, or it will say the OMC owns XYZ, exclude XYZ, excluding the balconies. So that's where you need to go and look. And as I said, every scheme is different, every lease is different. Maybe there should be standard
Mm,
schemes and leases, but we live in a free country where people are open to contractually negotiate between one another as to their property rights. So, but the upshot is it'll be in the head lease.
okay. So the head lease is the very important document to look for by
Absolutely.
the signs of things. So another question here. When issues arise in a multi-unit development, who does the tenant initially seek out to have any issues resolved? In the case, say, for example, that the property management company are not being helpful, who then should the tenant seek out to have the issues resolved? A lot of times, we in the citizens' information get a property management company who won't help because the tenant might be in arrears of fees for property management, etc.
Okay. A couple of things to break down there to re-emphasize some of the content in the slides. There's a couple of references in that question to property management company.
Mhm,
So what does that mean? Is that the property management agent or is it the owner's management company? So
mhm,
that's the first thing to do to ask, right? So the person needs to clarify that in the question. The second point is there's references to the tenant. Now, do you mean a long leaseholder who so in technically a free someone owning a unit in a development is in legal technical terms they are actually a tenant of the owner's management company. They hold a 999-year lease. So it's effectively a freehold, but it is in legal technical terms a tenant. Or do they mean someone who is renting from someone who owns the unit
mhm,
in the estate? So there are multiple points of clarification in that question, and I'm laboring it because it's important to draw the distinctions between the property management agent and the OMC, between an owner of a property, as in who owns the actual apartment, uh, or are they someone who is simply a renter from someone owning an apartment? But that's all helpful and trying to understand the jargon in terms of resolving the dispute. If the person is a renter, so someone who rents out the property from month to month or a year to year, the first person that renter should approach is the letting agent if there's a problem. So the owner of the home to whom from whom the home is rented may have appointed a letting agent to deal with queries. So that's the
mhm,
first point of contact for a tenant, for a renter, right? If they're not getting satisfaction there, maybe they can contact the property management agent directly to try and get help. A renter has no legal connection with the owner's management company, however,
yeah.
because the owner's management company is made up of the owners, not the renters. Now, if it's a situation where you're talking about an owner occupier in an estate, the first person that they go to is the property management agent. If they're not getting satisfaction from the property management agent, they can contact the directors of the OMC. And I see another question in on that particular point where a person, an owner, is not getting satisfaction from the property management agent, and they say that the only way they can contact the directors of the OMC is through the agent. But that's not quite the case.
Okay.
The owner has an opportunity to attend the annual general meeting at which the directors should be attending and put their questions in that forum, or they can write, they can send a letter to the owner's management company. So to the company secretary or to the directors, they can contact them directly that way. If they want to get the address for the company, it's going to be in their annual accounts, it's going to be in their title documents, it's going to be in the invoice for the annual services. Now,
Mhm.
happily, all this is explained in much more articulate fashion on our frequently asked questions page. So
Yeah.
those two questioners can maybe jump onto the FAQ section of our website where these are answered in much more detail than I've gone through there.
Okay. No problem at all. I'll move on to a slightly easier one or a little bit more straightforward. Are directors of an OMC always voluntary, that is, not paid? What happens if there are no volunteers?
Typically, directors of owners management companies are indeed unpaid volunteers. There are some exceptions, like everything else. There are exceptions that will arise, but in 90% of cases, the OMC directors are people who are civic minded, who want to get involved in making sure that their estates are run well, and they will step up to become directors. They take on that very responsible but very rewarding in a altruistic satisfaction sense rather than a financially remunerative sense.
Mhm.
And so, yes, usually volunteers. What happens if there are no volunteers? Well, let's play that out. The OMC collapses, the services and the state of the property falls apart. Nobody wants to live there anymore. People can't sell their homes, yada, yada, yada. Play that out. So let's not go there. Let's encourage our citizens to step up and become involved with the assurance that help is there, supports are there. There'll be typically a management agent, there'll be independent advice. They're working as a team. The resources are available from the housing agency and everyone else, including yourselves, Citizens Information, and they're put in place insurance so that they're not personally liable if something goes wrong. So all those steps are there to support everyone. And again, on our website is a suite of questions and hints and tips about recruiting new directors because nobody wants to be an OMC director for years and years and years. Volunteer fatigue, like any committee, like any sports club or choir or chess club or anything
Mm.
else, the committee are going to get tired, they're going to get worn out, they need to be replaced, succession planning. So, how to go about that, that's dealt with in our FAQs section. So, hopefully, that's helpful for that questioner.
Yeah. Okay. Now, somebody's saying here that loss of voting rights, as far as I can see, is not legislated for under the MUD Act. How do we assist a person whose right to vote has been revoked because they are in arrears or have a dispute that cannot be resolved between the parties involved?
Okay, well, just because someone's voting right has been removed on the basis that they haven't paid their service charge doesn't mean that they can't have a dispute resolved in the estate. To get into dispute resolution under the MUD Act, the MUD Act first of all prescribes that people must involve themselves in mediation. So mediation is a process where you appoint an independent party to look at the dispute and come up with recommendations. But mediation is ultimately a voluntary process, and people can reject the findings of of a mediation process. And if that happens, you go to the circuit court, you incur thousands of euro of legal fees to resolve your dispute. So that again is dealt with in the materials and the deep dives that are available on our website, on our YouTube channel, and in our FAQs section. But to answer the point directly, just because you don't have a right to vote doesn't mean you can't have your dispute or concerns addressed in the fashion that I've mentioned through mediation or a court case.
Okay.
So that's that one.
I think you've kind of addressed this one, but I'll just come at it from a different angle where they said we sometimes get queries from people saying that they get no response from management agents about issues and don't know how to contact the directors other than through the agent. What can they do?
They can attend the annual general meeting and have their issues raised there. They can write a letter directly to the directors, to the company secretary at the company's registered office address.
Okay, brilliant. And you have a fan out there. Somebody says David knows his stuff. Brilliant presentation. That must have been
Well,
your mammy.
yeah, thanks, Mum. Yeah, yeah, that's good thing I sent the Mother's Day card there for Sunday. I suppose the upshot is I know where the resources are. I know where the information is. I know where the kind of channels for the material is. It's only with the help and support of colleagues like yourself in the training team and the comms team to put it all together. And indeed, again, I compliment Dara Woods and the team in Citizens Information who keep their own website up to date as well. So it's a team effort.
Yeah, indeed. Now, just two more questions. Can the original OMC constitution be amended by member votes as needed?
It can. It requires what's called a special resolution. So that is from memory, and this is not legal advice. From memory, you require a 75% vote for a special resolution. So it can be amended through that special resolution process. And there's guidance available from the company's office, the CRO, and indeed the webinars, the dedicated. So if you go into the YouTube webinar on company law for OMCs on our YouTube channel, it covers that in fine detail as well.
Okay. I have somebody here who said, I have recently purchased an apartment and have not received a head lease document. Would the solicitor have this or the management company?
Both.
Okay, great. Okay. And the very last comment is, I agree, it's very helpful and clear session. So
Very
that's
good.
about another one for
Excellent.
you.
Excellent.
So
Yeah.
actually, that wraps it up. Thank you to everybody who put this session together. For Sarah, for Nicola, for Sophie, for Lisa Marie in the background. And that concludes our series of 5 information sessions for the staff of the Citizens Information Board. And we hope you enjoyed the sessions. We'll be sending you out a survey. So please do think about how we can improve it, or if you have any critical comments, please just fire them in. We can only learn from those. And I just want to thank everybody. I hope that you found this informative. We'll be sending through the slides from today's sessions, and you will also get the recordings then as well, sent through to your hub. So I just want to thank all of you for attending and for putting in your questions. And big thank you to David Rouse for presenting this today. And also to the other presenters who've presented through the series from various parts of the housing agency here and from the team at the Residential Tenancies Board. So I also want to thank Kathy O'Donoghue and the Citizens Information Board for supporting the collaboration. So we hope to see you again soon in the future. But thanks again and go out and enjoy the sunshine. All right. Thank you.